Okay, we now welcome on a very, very, very special guest. It is NBA Commissioner Adam Silver ahead of the NBA AllStar Game weekend in San Francisco. Mr. Commissioner, should we call you Mr. Commissioner? We've never had a commissioner on before.
Paul Rabel.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, second commissioner.
Yeah.
I know, Paul. Adam, please.
Okay, so Adam, thank you so much for joining us. I have to ask, because we're very excited for this interview. What was the sell process for you to come on this show? Did someone have to tell you, like, hey, these guys actually aren't the worst? Because I can't believe you're on. We're excited to interview you.
Well, I went to law school in Chicago.
Okay.
I worked in Washington, D.C. for years, so I know you guys are D.C. and Chicago guys. That was a big part of the selling point of coming on. And you guys are fun to watch and listen to. You guys do an incredible job.
I appreciate it. Also, one of our producers is a big Duke fan. Basically went to Duke. So, yeah, you've got connections everywhere on the show.
Yeah. That helps.
Yeah. All right, so All-Star Weekend. How are we feeling going into All-Star Weekend? I know you have tried to tinker with the All-Star Game to make it, better for fans. How do we feel going into this one?
I'm feeling good about it. I love the Bay Area. Obviously 4 championships there since I've been commissioner. So spent a lot of time in the market and multiple finals appearances beyond that. Beautiful new arena in San Francisco. A new format that we've talked a lot about, where, in essence, working with the Players Association, we came up with this format where it's, in essence, a round robin, games to 40, then a championship. So I think that's going to be really exciting for the fans. And I also, for us, as important as the game itself is, it becomes the epicenter of the basketball world for that weekend. It's essentially, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of events, community events in Oakland and San Francisco, opportunity to see old friends. I've been with the league for a long time, and when you have a neutral site finals, you can't plan to gather there. So essentially, people who've been in business for us for a long time can mark their calendars, be in the Bay Area. Our international partners can all be there as well. So it's sort of a 3-day long celebration of the game, and that for me is the best part about the whole long weekend.
When did you come to the decision that the format of the All-Star Game had to be changed? Was there one moment in the game last year where you're like, that's it, that I can't go back?
I think it was when I was presenting the championship trophy on the floor at the end of last year's All-Star Game. I think, like, everybody, was incredibly disappointed, at least speaking for the fans, the league office. It wasn't what we had hoped for. And then once I had an opportunity to talk to the players afterwards, I think they acknowledged as well, whatever happened, once they got out there, there wasn't any real competition. This was in Indianapolis. Like, Larry Bird had talked to the team in advance. Julius Erving had others. We thought we'd all come together with something that we thought would be effective. It obviously wasn't. I think then post All-Star Game, talking to several of the players, the perennial All-Stars who we knew would be back, we said, look, we just got to do a better job for the fans. We recognize that you just can't turn the clock back. Obviously the NFL and Pro Bowl went to flag football. Baseball's made done some changes to tweak their All-Star Game. So I said, what can we do to make this exciting and entertaining for the fans? And this is how we came up with this new format.
Yeah. I got a really dumb question for you, but we're not the smartest guys. What exactly does a commissioner do day to day? What does your job look like day to day? Because I just would imagine it's just like watching the games and then waiting for someone to text you being like, we got a problem.
That's the evening part of my job.
Okay.
The day part, it's more like a standard business job in many ways than people would think. I mean, you've got 30 teams, of course. We got the WNBA we're overseeing as well, the G League. We have a league in Africa now. We're looking at opportunities in Europe. So part of it is planning for the future. Another aspect of it is just regulating this league. There's constantly things happening with teams, business decisions they're making that if you want to make sure everything's unified as a league, that you have to coordinate among the many teams. We have, what I was mentioning before about people coming together in the Bay Area. We have literally hundreds of business partners, licensees who produce our products, broadcast partners, media partners who distribute our games, more traditional sponsors like Pepsi and Amex and Gatorade and companies like that. And so a lot of it's on the relationship side. continuing to build those relationships with our partners, negotiating deals with them, helping to plan for the future. It's also, we're a huge enterprise in terms of our budgets. And so I think that's the part where it's more like a standard job. Like we have thousands of employees and we have an HR department, a legal department, a marketing department. So also just bringing all those people together and doing my best I can along with other colleagues, just try to lead this enterprise.
Do you spend any time in your day-to-day searching your name online? Because I think you are probably one of the people that gets the most unsolicited advice.
I don't need to search because people seek me out. And so it comes through emails. It comes through people forwarding me things that other people are saying. We have our own communications department here who's sending me things. And in all seriousness, I actually find it very helpful because if you work in an industry where you're so closely covered and you have fans and a section of the newspaper devoted to you, that you get a lot of unsolicited ideas. And so one, I think when you look at things we've done over the last several years, the play-in tournament, the in-season tournament now known as the NBA Cup, all those ideas came from initially outside of the league. And then sort of it's a question of processing those ideas. And also there's understandably fans want changes. Some, you get criticism, you get, people feel good about certain things we're doing. But I think it's my job to do the best I can to incorporate a lot of that feedback. And incidentally, when you have 30 teams, 450 players on the NBA side, part of my job is hearing directly from players. I've been at the league for a long time, so when players are coming through New York and playing the Knicks or the Nets, often they'll stop by the office, and in those one-on-one conversations, I can get a better sense from them, how they see the league. Also, our players are also the age, in many cases, of our core demographic. So I'm always interested in how a 26-year-old player is consuming the NBA. Are you watching games on your phone? What social media sites are you on? What podcasts like yours are they watching? So that's very helpful. And again, it's not just owners of 30 teams. You have team presidents and GMs and coaches. So lots of different constituent groups that are constantly, providing feedback to the league office and sharing information with. And that adage has never been more true that two heads are better than one. And I just find that part of my job is to be a good listener and get advice from others, and then somehow filter that advice and figure out what's in the best interest of the league.
What's the dumbest idea that has gone from, okay, that's a dumb idea, to all right, we should actually think about this. Maybe it never even happened, but you at least paused and said, hey, just look at this for a second.
Last time I got that question on a show like this, it was the question that came from Dan Patrick. It was what's the wildest idea you've gotten? And I said 10-minute quarters. And I've been responding to questions about 10-minute quarters ever since. So I'm going to be really careful how I answer this question. I'd say, the people have raised the issue around the size of the court and the height of the basket. That's one. I think there have been various times along the way. It's interesting now that there's so much discussion about three-point shooting. You guys probably remember, it was a while ago, but maybe, God, time flies. So more sort of in the mid-'90s and later, where there was a lot of criticism around the game because people thought it become too physical, and the game, there was too much activity under the basket, and that the players weren't as skilled as they used to be, and that they'd lost the art of shooting.
Yeah.
And so, and at that time, where there seemed to be a prevalence of dunking, the thought was it's too easy to dunk.
Yeah.
And so
I've always said that.
It's quite remarkable then jump ahead till now, where there's a lot of discussion around whether the players are frankly too skilled, that three-point shooting has become so dominant, and that it's the level of difficulty in essence isn't high enough on some of those shots. So I can't say we ever seriously considered either, raising the height of the basket or widening the court, but those are issues that have come up over the years. I also think, I'm trying to think of a particular example. I know that a lot of marketing ideas, I got one, that I remember when teams first brought to the league the idea that we would put a brand on the uniform itself. And I remember at the time when we first discussed that, people said, and I wasn't commissioner yet when we first did that, David Stern was commissioner, but I was running the business side, and people said, I can't believe you're going to make our players look like NASCAR, cars, et cetera, whatever. And I think that's become very accepted. I think we did it in a fairly classy way. It's a relatively small logo, on the team jerseys, but that not only has added a lot of value to the league, But for those companies that choose to put their logos on team uniforms, they become that much more engaged in the league. They're that much more incentivized to promote the league. And so it becomes, a virtuous circle of sort of promotion around it. So a few of those things, I think, even looking at, I remember back in the day in the 90s, early 90s now, when the continuous score clock was first proposed. I remember Dick Ebersol, still a close friend, was the executive producer, the president of NBC Sports. He opposed that idea, both for football and basketball. I mean, it's almost unimaginable to watch a sporting event now and think you got to wait, for however many minutes till the director decides, to show you the score again.
Yeah.
But remember in those days, I mean, the initial idea was, no, we don't want to show a continuous score because if people tune in and they see it's a 10-point game or whatever, they'll tune out.
Yeah.
And it took a long time. And again, that's one of those conventions. It's almost unimaginable now to watch a game where you can't see the score at any moment. And my sense is there's, I think, a lot's about to change on the production side. I mean, as games are shifting from what I would call traditional television, call that broadcaster cable, to streaming, it creates all these new opportunities, all these new capabilities of the streamers because of interactivity to do new things on the screens. And I think, we're like for example, I understand the criticism now from people who don't like to see sports betting information during games, whether it's because they don't want it personally or they don't want their kids to be able to see it. I think we're not that far away where you're just going to go click. And if you don't want any information about sports betting, you won't have to look at it. On the other hand, if you're someone in a state where it's legal and you can get bet on sports, you'll see a lot more information if that's what you want. So I think things will become much more customized over time.
Yeah.
That was a very thoughtful, nuanced answer. And the main takeaway is that Adam Silver has considered raising the basket and extending the three-point line. So in the past, you've thought about it.
You have.
The thought has crossed your mind.
Here I go.
Yeah. Have you thought
I fell
about
for it the second time.
Listen, just throwing this out there, like in baseball, every park is different. The Yankee Stadium, they got the short porch. Have you thought about home teams getting to decide their own dimensions? So like you go to Detroit and they've got 8-foot rims. You go to play the Warriors and they've got they've extended their 3-point line by 3 feet. So every game is different. It's like, oh, we got to go play here. They're playing on 14-foot rims. That'd be fun.
I definitely can make some news with my answer to that one. I would say, so no, for the record, I haven't thought about that. But it is an interesting comparison. I will say, just because you mentioned baseball, talking about rule changes, I'm a huge baseball fan, and I'm a big fan, of the changes that they've made.
Yeah.
Like I think, the pitch clock, slightly enlarging the bases to make stealing easier and stuff like that. Like I've looked at those things, and we've talked about that at the league office and with our competition committee. And when I think the most traditional, in my mind, of all sports, the most resistant to change, the fact that they're making changes in that sport to keep up with the times, I'm not sure, different basket heights and different arenas is the answer, but I think it just means we have to stay on our toes and be open-minded about potential changes.
By the way, just want to correct one thing. Technically, you have thought about changing the rims and because we literally were just discussing it, so we'll put that out there.
We incepted
You have technically thought of it.
Fair
just
point.
through this conversation. We got you there.
Yeah. So do you ever hang out with other commissioners, and just be like, hey, commissioner to commissioner, here's something I'm thinking about?
A little bit. I don't know if they would describe it as hanging out, but I used to, when I first got to the NBA in the early 90s, Gary Bettman still worked here.
Yeah.
Before he went to the NHL. So he worked for David Stern at the NBA. So, and we've stayed close over the years. Roger Goodell and I knew him well even before he became commissioner, when Paul Tagliabue was commissioner, and he's been great. When I remember the first thing when it was announced I was commissioner, Roger was actually one of the first people to reach out to me and said, anything I can share with you, anything that'd be helpful with you. So we're obviously competitors in certain ways, but I think we're all fellow travelers trying to help each other think this notion that, a rising tide raises all boats, that it's what's good for premium professional sports is good for all of us. Same with Rob Manfred. I think I became commissioner right before he did, and we've compared notes on a lot of issues over the years. There's, again, as I said, I'm a big baseball fan. He's invited me over the years to a bunch of different events that I've been to with him. I've been to Yankee games here in New York with him. So we all talk to each other. I mean, everybody's running around, slightly different seasons. so we don't get to spend that much time together, but they're all great guys.
Yeah, there's some battles and some problems that only a fellow commissioner might understand. I'm sure that you go through.
Yeah.
Do you hypothetically, not talking about anything in specific, but hypothetically, do you have anything that's in place where you could potentially deny a trade? If like a team wanted to send a superstar to another team and maybe the return value on that superstar was not what would generally be expected.
You talking about Kyle Kuzma?
Yeah, so I'm a Wizards fan. Well, I'm a Wizards fan, and we just sent Kuzma.
No, believe it or not, and there's some confusion. People have yelled out to me for some reason in the last week or so when I've been at games that I should be vetoing that trade the way David Stern vetoed a trade back in the old days. And there's always some confusion there. David never vetoed a trade that when he was the acting owner of New Orleans and the commissioner at the time that he turned down a trade that was proposed to him by the general manager of the team. But no, I mean, the way we don't put a thumb on the scale, so to speak, that when a trade comes into the league office, what our sort of basketball and legal folks do is they make sure that that trade works under the confines of the collective bargaining agreement and whatever rules are in place. And then it's up or down. It gets approved or not based on those rules. We don't get to weigh in on what we think the merits of the trade are or should be.
Okay.
Gotcha. I am going to miss Kuzma. Big Cat's right. That broke my heart.
Did you at least text like are you sure?
No.
Okay.
You were probably honestly. Let's level. You were probably like, "Oh, Luka's going to L.A. Huge market. That's cool."
Honestly, I promise. Look at the league right now. That two clearly smaller market teams, certainly Oklahoma City and Cleveland's a little bigger than Oklahoma City, but not one of the bigger markets in the league, are the two best records in the league right now. And I think it's great. We've had 6 different champions over the last 6 years. And, this may sound obvious, but I want all our teams to do well and be competitive. And frankly, Dallas is a big market. And so, was I surprised that he was traded? From that standpoint, yeah, I'm a fan. And that the teams don't necessarily give the league inside information on those kinds of things. So that trade was, it wasn't one that I saw coming. And by the way, I love Luka. I've known him since the day he came into the league. He's obviously a great player. He's a great young man. And teams make these trades for reasons that in some cases only they know. They have inside information about a player. They're living with a player. They have a particular style they want to play. They have a vision for what that team should become. And truly only time will tell. I mean, the one thing I'll say, having been with this league for a long time, like truly nothing is written. People who say they can predict the future generally can't. And we'll see. I'm sort of rooting for Dallas and I'm rooting for the Lakers. I'm rooting for Anthony Davis to recover quickly and be the all-star we know he can be and stay healthy for a long time. And I'm definitely rooting for Luka to demonstrate to the world what a great player he is in LA.
Okay, so we shouldn't come to Adam Silver for grading of trades because we like to, in sports media, to just grade trades instantly and say that we're right and we know the future.
Mm-hmm.
You have your job and I have my job.
Your
job is to grade trades. Yeah. My job is to make sure they comply with league rules.
Yeah. You mentioned David Stern. I didn't realize this, but you got into the NBA by writing a letter to a bunch of different people asking for advice, and David Stern was one of those people who actually responded. Is that true? Because that's a very cool
true.
story.
So I was practicing law in New York, just had only been a lawyer for a few years, and decided I wanted to do something different. I'm still happy I went to law school. It's been very helpful to me over the years. But I wrote David a letter. This is pre-internet, where you wrote letters and mailed them. And it said, and I actually was looking for advice. It wasn't so much that I thought I wanted to work at the NBA. And I'm always telling young people this story because it's so different these days, where you can go on the internet and find out all kinds of information about the NBA and what happens in the league office. And there's all these sites where they rate people's jobs and they talk about whether they think they're fairly compensated and all that. Obviously, none of that existed in those days. And so David was someone who had worked at a law firm in New York before he had made the transition. He came over to the NBA as the general counsel before he was the commissioner. But I wrote him a letter saying, I'm also a lawyer in New York. I'd be interested in making the transition. I wasn't so sure that it would be to a sports league. And in fact, at the time, I worked for a law firm that was representing HBO, and I was fascinated with the media business. And David at that time had recently done some of the initial cable deals where it was the early days of TBS, and he had done a broadcast deal. Ted Turner was also an owner of the Atlanta Hawks, and he had done a deal with Ted Turner to put NBA games on TBS. And because I was doing a lot of work for HBO, David Stern's name kept coming up in the context of media. So I wrote him a letter saying, I'm interested in making this transition. If you ever had time, I'd love to meet you and talk to you. I'd actually met him once before. He had worked at one point at the same law firm as my father. I didn't really know David, but the sort of letter began, I am the son of such and such, and hoping that would sort of build a bridge to him. I remember he called me, and I think in those days too, you were used to sending a letter and not hearing back for, some cases, weeks. It was just everything moved at a different pace. His assistant called me at some point and said he'd like to schedule time with you. And my office was in New York City. I mean, where I am today in the NBA office is the same place as we were in the early 90s when Dave was commissioner. And I was just across town. And his assistant called me, scheduled. And again, like everything moved slower. It was like, are you free 2 weeks from Tuesday or whatever? And I came and saw him. And he gave me some advice about how I might transition out of the law. That's what I was interested in doing, and some media advice. And then I'll condense the story because I've already been long-winded. At some point, he reached back out to me and said, there's something I'd like to talk to you about. And it turned out he was looking for an assistant. And he ultimately hired me. And my first job at the NBA was special assistant to the commissioner. Worked for David. I was 30 years old. It was so 32 years ago. I came to work here and then worked as an assistant, then became chief of staff, I mentioned. And I then went to what was the entertainment side of the business, ran a division called NBA Entertainment for years, deputy commissioner. And so this is my 6th job being commissioner. So I worked my way up the ladder here at the NBA over the years.
That's awesome.
Very cool that he took the time to do that.
Yeah.
Very, very
Yeah,
cool.
no, it was, by the way, I have to say, David changed my life in so many ways. And I had 5 different jobs before I was commissioner, all of them working for David. And I sort of would joke to people, even when I was the deputy commissioner, my job was still the special assistant, David Stern.
Right.
And I mean, you guys, everybody is, you may have had a chance to meet him over the years. I mean, he was full of life. He was a genius when it came to sports marketing. I think as much credit as he gets, maybe not enough for transforming the whole industry, not just the NBA, just everybody's approach. Even, I remember when I came to work at the NBA, I mean, he was the first person who really thought of the NBA as a brand, as a brand marketer, even though his background was as a lawyer. I mean, now it's just a given that NBA is a brand, MLB, NHL, NFL, obviously, but it's like he had a whole different way, a whole different vocabulary of approaching sports. And also, I think about how much of my time now I spend on growing the game globally. I mean, David was so far ahead of his time. And when I got to the NBA in '92, shortly thereafter was the Dream Team. And which also transformed the NBA. I mean, one other interesting statistic: at the time that I got to the NBA, roughly 5% of the league players in the league were born outside the United States. Now it's around 30%.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
When you mentioned Luka or Giannis, go down the Wemby. Now the Joker, our very best players. Many of them are born outside the United States now, and that pool of players. I mean, just you got a chance to watch some of the Olympics out of Paris. A U.S.-Serbia game or the U.S.-France game, there's so much high-level basketball being played around the world, and David really had that vision that this could truly be a global game.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, while we have you here, I just want to give you a piece of unsolicited advice from me, and take it for what you will, but I think a lot of people agree with me. One of the most frustrating things to watch in the NBA, and I love watching basketball, but this is very frustrating when players are obviously flopping and embellishing fouls. Is it in consideration to make embellishment, flopping, reviewable, technical foul, cut and dry? Don't do it, because it's tough to watch on TV.
Well, so, it's either a year ago or 2 years ago, we added the ability to call a technical in-game, for flopping. Mm-hmm. So that was a change in rules, a new rule that we did, modeled a little bit after the FIBA rules, the international basketball rules. And we have a provision where we do review after the fact. Obviously, we want finality in the game, so we're not going to go back and change scores or anything. But guys can be fined after the fact. And at least according to our own, sort of reviews of the games, we've cut back considerably on flopping. It's still, I will say that, for my European colleagues, European friends, there's a tradition in European soccer, or global soccer, of flopping. It was sort of, to me, brought to the NBA stylistically by a lot of the international players. A lot of them grew up as soccer players. We've tried to crack down on it. It's again, I think we've made progress. My sense is that as various forms of replay get better and get faster, look, the problem is, by definition, you're fooling the ref. And if you get away with it, especially in real time, you get there. All you can do after the fact is potentially fine the players. But and I think you said it. It's the embellishment is the hardest, because now they're teaching in youth basketball is you want to demonstrate to the officials, at least the way they're taught, is to embellish so that the official clearly sees. So you're often seeing somebody shoved and they're going flying backwards, and then so the official in real time and I understand too, player frustration, fan frustration, sometimes with the officiating. We're doing everything we can to make it better. But I when I watch the officials, it's remarkable to me what they can do in real time. I mean, when you think in a split second and the speed of the game to be making those calls, and then add flopping on top of that, or embellishment, that they're supposed to be able to discern the difference, and the amount of force that's going into a push and the reaction from the players. I will say that technology, the changes in technology will help us there. I mean, just shifting slightly, doesn't go directly to flopping, but guys are constantly trying to fool the officials when who did it touch last? They're pointing and et cetera. That we're not that far away from having technology where, just like you think in tennis, where if where there's an automated call as to whether the ball was inside the line or outside the line. It's this technology called Hawkeye. It's owned by Sony. We're working with Sony also to bring that to basketball, so that whoever's, think there's 100 fingers on the floor at any given time, various body parts, to instantaneously show who the ball went out on, if somebody's foot was on the line, anything that can be objectively determined, goaltending, et cetera. And I think that will allow, so one, there'll be a whole category of calls that will be objectively right or wrong, but and will speed up the game from that standpoint. But just as importantly, for those more subjective calls, the officials won't have to both be looking at the feet of somebody's feet to see if they touch the line and their hands at the same time. They can really focus on what is truly subjective. And I think we'll be able to do a better job sort of discerning whether there's some kind of embellishment going on. So it's if the standard is perfection, we got a long ways to go, but I think we've made improvements there.
Have you thought about maybe making the standard not perfection? And I say that in that I think you've talked about this before. The review system, games slow down at the end. It's a really hard watch for people, and we want to watch the action. What about just doing a week where there's no reviews? And every team knows it, and it's like, hey, we're not doing any instant replay. We're not doing any reviews. The call on the court stands, and just see how the game flow goes.
It's interesting to say that. Like, number one, we did, a couple of years ago, we changed the format at the end of the game. We reduced the number of timeouts, and we reduced the ability for officials to go to discretionary reviews. I mean, you'll recall just a few years ago, virtually every play towards the last 2 minutes, the players were going like this, So we added one more coach's challenge, but we reduced those discretionary reviews. And I think that's made a big difference. And to your point, I've had many players and coaches tell me over the years that they would prefer speed to accuracy in certain cases, because especially near the end of the game, when there's those long reviews, guys are literally getting cold standing there, getting out of rhythm, and they just say, all right, red ball, and move forward and move on, as opposed to waiting for the endless reviews. And as I said, I think back to the technology that some people also don't like that we might have a different standard in the last 2 minutes. But look, when you have a game like basketball where there's a lot of scoring, even if there's a bad call in the second quarter, you can make up for it over the course of the game. But you can't necessarily in the last 2 minutes. So I'm in favor of there potentially being more scrutiny. But as I was saying, if you can use technology and take a whole category of calls off the table, and that they're now objective, I think we can reduce the number of replays, because also in those calls, just like in tennis, it'll just be, you'll see sort of the quick animation. I think you need transparency. People don't want to just be told, Bulls ball. They want to know what happened. And just like in tennis, you ding, 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 you'll see like some animation, you'll see what's going on. But then, and also, if you think back, like some early days in tennis, there was a lot more arguing, with the officials. And now, once you see that animation, and there's an ooh and an ah from the fans that just barely touch the line or whatever else, but it's play on, and I think everyone would prefer that.
Yeah, just think about no review week. It'd be a whole event.
Right.
We could just be like, hey, it's no review week.
Yeah, suck it up.
Yeah,
week.
this is kind of a fun thing. You
If
can market
I say
around
I'm
it.
thinking about it, does that mean it's under consideration?
Yeah, you've
It
already
is.
thought about
It's under
it.
consideration.
Yeah. You've
Just
already
have
thought
every ref just say life isn't fair.
Yeah, right. Tough shit.
It's interesting though, but I've actually made that point, not using those same language, but human error is part of this game.
Yeah.
It's certainly part of the game when a player misses a shot. Somehow it gets lost sometimes, that it's also part of the game when an official makes a mistake.
Yeah.
And I get it. And if an official makes too many mistakes, they can't be an official in this league. But you're right, perfection can't be the standard. There are going to be mistakes. And I think, and often what separates the best teams is their ability to move on from that mistake. And I just lastly say, we have 7-game series in the playoffs.
Yep.
And I think that, as I think some of the best basketball minds in the league will say, that it's a highly likely that at least for that week or 2 weeks, the better team is going to win the 7-game series.
Yeah.
Regardless of the officiate.
Also, a bad call gives us something to yell about the day after the show.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll be screaming. If you just make it perfection, it's like we're the dog that was chasing the car,
I think
and then
you
we
just saw
catch
in those
it.
trades we were talking about that NBA seems ready-made for social media.
Yes. Yes.
It
A lot of
does.
chatter.
It
Yes.
does. Yeah. Has there been any consideration to adjusting the league schedule? I know it's been in place for a long time in the general format that it's in, but waiting and starting the year on maybe Christmas Day and extending it at the end.
There has been. I mean, that is one thing that we have thought a fair amount about, and we've looked at different proposals. And I think for a lot of people, you're right, that there was always this notion that the league, in the old days, we would start on NBC on Christmas Day. We would start on network television Christmas Day, sort of, the regular season of the NFL had wound down. People could now move their attention to the NBA. The issue we have there is one of moving into the summer. And by the way, things are changing so rapidly culturally in terms of viewership and everything else that no idea is ever completely dead. But at least historically, the thought was we wanted our season to be over by July 1st, in essence, and was sort of working backwards. If you're going to get the draft in the last week of June, and you're going to therefore start the finals, but anticipating you potentially could have a 7-game finals, it means you got to start roughly June 1st, working backwards. Sort of that's how you end up with a training camp in October, season that starts roughly the beginning of November. I mean, people's television habits have changed dramatically. I think in large part, we all, reaching for my phone, we all carry a TV with us everywhere we go now. I look at the kinds of things I would put you guys in the category of non-traditional media, that the amazing popularity now of podcasts like yours, people's enormous amount of time, looking at screens, listening to audio feeds of things that, the other thing about us moving into July is sort of, let's just say, okay, you can move the finals into July. Then we have our summer league. When does and part of it, it's actual consideration, like when do they get vacation?
Yeah.
And part of it is, it's always in the tradition of this league, there's sort of the equivalent of a summer vacation that matches up with family vacations. Even once, summer league ends, it's sort of the third week of July. Things can settle down a little bit, for the last part of July and August. And now I'm not talking about the league office, largely for the players and the arrest on their body and everything else. So, I will say, I think all these things we will continue to look at. I don't think in the short term we'll do it. I just lastly say, there used to be this notion, in television they call it HUT levels, households using television, that traditionally, because of summer vacation and things, that once you got to July 1st, there were fewer people watching television, which why, again, historically, all the primetime shows, when we were younger would launch in the fall. You can almost think of the beginning of the NFL season was one of those shows with launching. I think though now, as I said, like people's television habits have changed dramatically. Like streaming has changed a lot of those conventions. Like new shows launch on Netflix all the time. in July, nobody thinks twice about it. So I think these are all things that we'll continue to look at.
All right, so I got one last question for you. This has been so much fun. NBA AllStar Weekend this weekend. My last question, it's a Roback question, rhoback.com, promo code TAKE, 20% off your first purchase, Q-zips, polos, hoodies, joggers, shorts, roback.com, promo code TAKE. I have to pitch you my one idea that I've had for many years, and you got to think about it. And I don't need credit for it when you actually enact it. So there's obviously been issues at times with fans getting a little unruly, maybe talking too much to the players, that whole experience. My rule is very simple. Every single player, when the season starts, gets one chance to call out any fan they want, and then they just get to beat the fuck out of them in the middle of the court. And once they use it, they can't use it again for the rest of the year. Thoughts on that rule?
Not a good idea.
Okay, but listen, you're not seeing the vision. When you see Kevin Durant, you decide to say something really like mean to him. You're like, wait, does he have his one fight a fan left this year?
You lost me on the beat the shit out of him part.
Yeah, well,
I was with you up till like, all right, you can single out one fan and then we'll review that fan's conduct.
Think about the ratings, though, Mr. Commissioner. Think about the ratings. They're like, oh my God, we're going to Sacramento, and DeMar DeRozan has called out someone from the 10th row, and they're about to fight in the middle of they're stopping the game to fight.
We'll bring a cage.
Yeah, sure.
Of the arena. Is the fan allowed to fight back?
Yes. So that's also part of it. Like, you don't want to call.
I didn't fully consider your idea.
Yeah, you can you call out someone with cauliflower ears, and you might have been asking for too much.
Are you making fun of my ears?
No, you don't have cauliflower ears, but I have made fun of your ears in the past. I'm sorry. I apologize.
I'm a long-time listener.
Well, yeah, you can listen to anything. Sorry, you put you alley-oop that for me. Sorry,
I walked into that one.
Or just maybe at least just allowing fights like in hockey.
Yeah,
like blowed off. Yeah,
what's so interesting? I will say I'm a New Yorker. I'm a Rangers fan, and go to games occasionally. And as you guys remember, there was that era again back to the '90s when there was a fair amount of fighting in the league, and David Stern, he cracked down on it. We had automatic suspensions, walking off the bench, and all that. And it's still surprising me to this day when I go to a hockey game and they face up and the officials step back.
Yeah.
And there's it's part of the culture of hockey. And I know I've heard the arguments that by allowing players to fight things out in that way actually cuts down on violence in certain cases by having enforcers and everything else. It's obviously so foreign to the NBA, but based on the idea you're sharing.
Think about it.
I'll share it with Gary Bettman too. Maybe just bring fans in as well.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's happened before. Ty Domi in the penalty box.
We had a lot more dumb ideas that maybe next time you come on, we can pitch you, because I know that we had a ton of them. So maybe we'll just do an entire podcast where we give you the dumbest ideas.
All right, I'm available.
I did have a fix for the All-Star Weekend. It was just in line with the LeBron-Bronny thing that the winning team gets automatically their firstborn gets a 1-year contract in the NBA.
That's a good idea,
That's
too.
That's a pretty good idea.
That's a good idea. Or,
Legacy League.
What I was going to pitch him, which I won't pitch him, but I was just going to pitch him rigging the draft.
Oh.
Yeah.
That would be a smart idea.
That would be a good thing to do.
For which team?
For the Wizards. Cooper Flagg to the Wizards.
Yeah.
I'm a Duke guy. Cooper's unbelievable. Huh?
He's great. We would take such good care of him in D.C. You're also a D.C. guy.
Yes, there you go. All right, well, Commissioner, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and we can have you on again. And like I said, we'll do an special episode where we just give you the 100 dumbest ideas we've ever thought of. And when you think about them, everyone's going to be like, Adam Silver's thinking about this, because you are thinking about the fight a fan rule. You have technically thought of it.
Mulling it over.
Yes. All right, thanks so much.